Hi, my name is Jason Rowe. Today, I will be talking to you about the function and structure of the major parts of the brain. The human brain is the most complex organ in our body, and along with our spinal cord, this makes up the central nervous system of the body. The specific areas we will be reviewing, thanks to the information provided by our class textbook, the ninth edition of Human Physiology, From Cell to System by Laura Lee Sherwood. We are going to look at the cerebral cortex and the four lobes that make up the cerebral cortex, the basal nuclei, thalamus, hypothalamus, cerebellum, and brainstem. The central nervous system can be divided into two different areas, white matter and gray matter. Gray matter is mostly made up of neuron somas, the body of the neuron cell, whereas the white matter is made up of myelinated axons, the tail-like stem of the neuron. Gray matter is the working part of the brain, like the processor chip in a computer, whereas the white matter is like the wiring of a computer. It sends information about to where it needs to go in the body or other parts of the brain. The outer gray matter layer of the brain is called the cerebrum, which this picture is basically a view of. This makes up the cerebral cortex, and the cerebral cortex is divided into two hemispheres that are connected by a band of neuron axons called the corpus callosum. There's a three-layer protective covering over the brain called the meninges. It surrounds the brain and the spinal cord. The outermost layer, the dura mater, it's a very thick and tough layer. The dura mater itself is divided into two layers. The periosteal layer of the dura mater lines the inner dome of the skull or cranium, and the meningeal layer is below that. The space between these layers allows for the passage of veins and arteries that supply blood flow to the brain. The next layer, the arachnoid layer, the arachnoid matter is a thin, whip-like layer of connective tissue that does not contain nerves or any blood cells. And below the arachnoid matter is the cerebral spinal fluid. This fluid cushions the entire nervous system. This includes the brain and the spinal cord again, and continuously circulates around the structure to help remove impurities. The last one, the pie matter, the thin membrane that really hugs the surface of the brain and follows its contours. This layer is rich with veins and arteries. The cerebral cortex itself is made up of or covered in ridges and folds called gyres and sulci. They create more surface area for the brain, and this allows for more neurons in the brain in total, which adds to the brain's already impressive processing power. The cerebral cortex has four major functional areas that help body movement, coordination of our subconscious motor activities, taking in of information for learning motor skills, and cognitive abilities. And here they are, the four lobes of the cerebral cortex. We have the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. The frontal lobe is where a lot of our higher thinking happens, how we make decisions, our personality is based in this area of the brain. The movements of muscles and are associated with the motor cortex of the frontal lobe. Next, the parietal lobe of the brain This takes in and processes sensory input. The parietal lobe, it interprets touch, pressure, heat and cold, and pain. And then using this information, it helps a person understand where your body is in relation to everything around it, like where you are in space. It also contains the Wernicke area, which helps interpret speech. The occipital lobe focuses on taking in and interpreting visual information. And the last one, the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe interprets sound, especially sound as in like musical rhythms, and it does process some short-term memory information as well. And then while we're looking at this outer area of the brain, the bottom right of this diagram, you can see the cerebellum. The cerebellum plays an important role in our the physical muscle movement, maintains our posture as well as our equilibrium, muscle movement coordination, such as standing up, running, or screwing in a light bulb even. This is all handled by the cerebellum, as in like all those little muscles that have to movements that have to work together. The cerebellum helps coordinate them so they're all in unison when you're doing one of these activities. There's been some recent research that's found that there's a role in memory and sensory information organization in the cerebellum, and there's a lot of studies looking into this new area of what the cerebellum can do. Inside the brain, we have the basal nuclei or basal ganglia. The basal nuclei helps with body movement. It plays a role in the inhibitory actions of muscles, of stopping the muscles. It stops useless movement and maintains necessary bodily movements like posture that you don't think about, the things you just do. A lot of the basal nuclei inhibitory effects are focused on the thalamus. It's the thalamus. It reinforces some muscle movements created by the cerebral cortex. So the inhibitory effect can be focused on the thalamus area. Regarding the thalamus, it is responsible for monitoring sensory input before it reaches the cortex. The thalamus weeds out unnecessary information and allows the needed sensory information to go in. It can direct our conscious mind towards information of interest to us. Like if you're in a crowded room, a lot of people talking, there's a lot of background noise, but you will hear your phone ring out of all that noise because it's something of importance to you, so your brain gets focused to it. Just below the thalamus is the hypothalamus. This regulates a lot of our homeostatic processes, your heartbeat, body temperature control, thirst, urine output, contractions of the uterus, milk production, food intake, your sleeping and waking cycle, posterior and anterior hormone production. Basically, it's regulating the entire internal environment of our body. And then last on our list, the brainstem. You have 3 sections to the brainstem: the midbrain, pons, and medulla. Together, the brainstem is an important junction from the brain to the spinal cord. The midbrain is the connection point of the brainstem to the brain itself. It's responsible for a variety of environmental changes in the body. The pons are it's actually a starting point for like a third of our cranial nerves that enable a range of activities in the body. And then the last part, the medulla, this is the connection point to the spinal cord itself. It manages important subconscious functions like heartbeat and breathing. So that concludes like an overview the basics of the location and function of the major regions of the brain. None of the areas of the brain really act alone or are really in isolation of each other. Neural configurations of the brain do connect all regions of the brain together. It's just that the neurons that work on certain tasks together perform a function tend to be organized in the same areas. So the way we organize information, we recognize patterns. So we organize this visually into a way that we can understand it. So the way we have it organized doesn't mean that these areas are boxed off from each other. We're just kind of showing where the major physical location is for where some of these functions come from. It's definitely a lot more detail involved here. In this research, there's a great paper. It's called The Early Environmental Influences on the Development of Children's Brain Structure and Function from the Journal of Developmental Medicine and Child Neurology. In it, the writers, they discuss their review of the subject, a lot of evidence linking adverse environmental factors during early life and prenatal development with long-term changes in the brain size and structure within the brain. And specifically connectivity in the amygdala and the hippocampus area specifically. They also looked at genetic variations that can change the impact of this adverse environmental conditions on child development in the brain. And in the last part, they do note that there is some positive early life experiences that possibly benefit childhood brain development and can even reverse some of these negative effects that they found and discussed. If you look at the figure here to the right, it shows that there's the genetic variability of genes that are involved in neural signaling, like signals like serotonin. They do have an interaction with adversity in early childhood life that can have an effect on our early neural development. Changes are seen in the brain function and structure, specifically in the hippocampus and the amygdala, and these areas which are areas of emotional development. So these brain changes can affect social emotional development, behavior dysfunction, and the risk of health problems. And along with the description of these possible negative effects that can occur in our neural development, they list actions that can help in early childhood as well. They saw that physical activity in mothers during pregnancy can have a positive effect on neural development itself. They saw a higher density of cells overall, but obviously specifically they were focused on neurons and brain development. In early childhood, experimental environmental enrichment, which is hands-on learning, which I am a huge fan of myself. That introducing that to early childhood development, they saw an increase in neuroplasticity and an increase in brain volume, specifically after there had been prenatal stress, and then this experimental environmental enrichment was introduced. I saw a decrease in possible depressive behavior and fear with the introduction of experimental enrichment. So this is I find this be a fantastic thing. I'm a very big fan of hands-on learning and the positive effects that it can have. Regarding diet, during pregnancy, they saw that there's a possibility that taking in long chain unsaturated fatty acids that can decrease psychosocial decreases in prenatal development as well. And the paper, and it's a great review of the brain development, and concludes that the exposure in early life adversity is associated with modifications of some kind with brain size and structure within areas of the brain. that some of it can be overcome, but there's still a lot to look at and study regarding brain for us to really understand the full inner workings of the brain. So that concludes this section. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And there's a list of references for everybody. Again, thank you. Everybody have a good day.